Hi, my name's Sam Bushman. My kids call me Sex Ed Sam. I'm a sexuality educator. I told them I was going to be speaking with you today, and I asked them what they thought I should talk with you about. Here are some of their thoughts. From an 8th grader. Tell them that 2 methods of contraception is the standard for pregnancy prevention. Nobody knows that. From a 6th grader who had just learned about anatomy and physiology, tell them that there's not actually a bone in a penis. It would be a terrible way to go through life not knowing that. From a high school sophomore, tell them it's scary that some people think it's scary to talk about this stuff. From a high school senior, tell them that we want to hear from our parents about what they expect of us. Even when we don't act like it, we really do care what they think. From a high school freshman, tell them that teenagers are actually capable of making responsible decisions. And the kicker, from a high school junior, ask them to remember what it was like to be 17. Then ask them to think about all the things it would have been nice to know that they didn't need to learn the hard way. That's the kind of sexuality education that all kids deserve. So do you guys remember what your sexuality education was like? So unfortunately, not much has changed. And do you remember all of those late night, heartfelt conversations that you had with your parents about what they wanted your relationships to be like and what they hoped your sexual experiences would be like? So yeah, none of those conversations are happening either. And the very unfortunate reality is that only 22 states require that sex ed be taught at all. And of those states, only 13 say that sex ed needs to be medically, technically, or factually accurate. Right, that's a little scary, right? I know, I feel you. It's very scary. So, for kids to make informed, responsible choices about their relationships and sexual health, they really need healthy sexual development to be addressed in the home and in the classroom. And currently, really, neither are happening. So there's a couple of myths that kind of are keeping us stuck, and that was what I was hoping to speak with you about today. Myth number 1, someone else's kid is the problem. It doesn't matter what community I go to, everybody thinks it's those kids over there. My daughter would never get pregnant. My kid would never have sex without a condom. My son would never be sexually aggressive with a partner. When it's someone else's kid, it's easy not to talk, right? You don't have to worry about your kid, it's those people over there. So the reality of the situation is that all kids are at risk for making poor decisions about their relationships and their sexual health. Myth number 2, by talking, you will put the idea in their head. And listen, I hear you all laugh, but let me tell you, this is very serious. People really, really feel this. They're like, if I talk with my kid about sex, they're gonna think I'm condoning it, and they really worry about this, and it's really, really getting in the way. So, a couple of things. Remember your 16-year-old self. No one has to put the idea in your head, right? You're already there. There's something called normative sexual development. Sometime in adolescence, it's gonna strike all of us, and it's gonna be front and center, and nobody needs to put the idea there, right? A couple of other things. So think about it, instead of sex, think about it in the context of drunk driving. So when we teach kids about drunk driving, do we ever worry that they're gonna get hammered and then steal our cars and go joyriding? We really don't. Something happens when we start talking and thinking about sex where it's kind of like just sends us off because it's anxiety provoking. So even if you didn't like my drunk driving example, we actually have really robust data on this. 3 decades of social science research tells us that the more we talk to kids, the better that they do. You're not gonna put any ideas in their head. The other thing I tell my parents is that a lot of people feel like they have to get it right the first time. What to say, how to say it, where to start, not clear, right? If you stop thinking about it as an event and you start thinking about it as a process, everything becomes so much easier because you always have the opportunity to circle back around, right? Myth number 3, parental influence cannot compete. So we live in this sex-saturated culture that's really uncomfortable talking about sex. Parents think consistently, they overestimate when we do research on this, and by we, I mean people smarter than me. Kids consistently say that parents most influence their decisions about sex, and parents consistently underestimate their own influence and overestimate the influence of friends and the media. When you ask kids, they also consistently say, if I were able to have open and honest conversations with my parents about sex and sexuality, it would be easier for me to delay sexual activity, and it would be easier for me to prevent unintended pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections. They actually just published a study, and again, they as smart people, a couple of weeks ago, that said they looked at kids' last sexual experience, teenagers' last sexual experience, and whether or not they had used contraception. And 7 out of 10 kids who hadn't used contraception at their last intercourse said the reason that they didn't was because they were afraid their parents would find out and judge them. So to me, that doesn't sound like kids that don't care what their parents think. That to me sounds like a kid that thinks a ton about what their parents think, right? So let's not miss the opportunity. Myth number 4, I'm not capable of talking to my kid about this. I understand why you would feel that way. Most of us don't have a framework for how these conversations are supposed to go because our parents never spoke with us, right? So it's easy. It would be difficult. I told you earlier about what some of my kids had to say about what I should talk about today. When I asked my parents, they said, for better or for worse, I understand that I am the primary sexuality educator of my kid. I already told you about how they really do care what they think. And my mom's told me the cost of talking are simply too high. It doesn't matter how uncomfortable it makes me. I know my kid the best. And you really do, right? Like, who knows your kids better than you? I know my kid best. I'm going to get over the fact that I'm uncomfortable, and I'm going to step up because I want it to be better for my kid than it was for me. I also tell my parents on the last day of class, so they go through these 6 90-minute sessions. On the last day, I tell them, you already had everything that you needed. All I did was buck you up. Truly, all I did was get you excited and rally you and empower you and say yes, and you went forth and prospered. You already have everything that you need to talk with your kids. I actually used to believe this one myself. Myth number 5, kids think they're invincible. When I first started working with teenagers, I always thought too that kids had a sense of invincibility and that they always thought it didn't matter what they did, nothing bad would ever happen to them. Actually, when I started working with teenagers, what I found, at least most of the ones that I worked with, it wasn't so much that they thought they were invincible, they actually felt a tremendous sense of vulnerability. So it wasn't, it doesn't matter what I do, everything will work out fine. It was, it doesn't matter what I do, bad things will happen. That's really depressing, right? That's like infinitely worse than thinking you're invincible, right? So how do we give kids the tools, the information, and the support that they need to move them from this disempowered, one-down position into a place where they feel like they can act in accordance with their own beliefs and values and influence positive outcomes on their own behalf? Agency is what it's about. Myth number 6, it's either abstinence only or comprehensive sex ed. In the public discourse, this is how we talk about sex education. It's either this or it's this. What I found, which I thought was fascinating when I started working with kids, was that information wasn't enough. In terms of abstinence only versus comprehensive sex ed, consistently, you can go back decades, 80% of Americans feel that kids deserve information about abstinence. It's the only 100% effective way to avoid unintended pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections. and also information about how to keep themselves safer if they do choose to be sexually active. Right? So we're essentially arguing about, we have these conflicts about, who rightfully deserves the right to educate kids about these issues. Is it the government? Comprehensive sex ed. Is it the family? Abstinence only. The reality is kids need both. Kids need educators in the classroom to provide high quality, scientifically based information from which they can make their decisions, and they also need their parents to convey their beliefs and values to help guide their decision making. So when I first started doing this work, I had the opportunity to do this model that I was developing at Carnegie Mellon's pre-college. And it was essentially, I had 150 kids sign up. They were from all over the country. So all 50 states, kids are participating in the program. They had everything from absolutely no classroom sex ed to abstinence-only sex ed. And I actually had a handful of students also that had probably the best comprehensive sex ed that there was to offer. So what I found in working with these kids, and when I say information is not enough, what I was finding was that they could tell you how to put a condom on a banana, but they couldn't tell you how to negotiate condom use with a partner. They could point to an ovary on a diagram, but they couldn't tell you how to prevent the sexually transmitted infection that was going to render them infertile when they wanted to start their family. They could rattle off the characteristics of a healthy relationship: trust, communication, respect, but they weren't able to assess whether or not the relationships that they were participating in was actually healthy or not. Right? So comprehensive sex ed is all about information, and information is great, but I worry that even if we put it everywhere, it's not going to get us to where we need to go. I think what we should be chasing instead is wisdom, right? How do I act in accordance with my own beliefs and values, and how do I apply the information that I've learned to my own life in a meaningful way? So the consequences of all of this are very real. The United States has the highest rates of teen pregnancy, unintended pregnancy, abortion, and sexually transmitted infections among all nations in the Western industrialized world. I'll give it to you one more time. Everybody's face just went, The United States has the highest rates of teen pregnancy, unintended pregnancy, abortion, and sexually transmitted infections among all nations in the Western industrialized world. And those are just the sexual health outcomes. Every other pregnancy in the United States is unintended. 1 in 4 teenage girls are currently walking around with a sexually transmitted infection. 1 in 3 kids involved in a dating relationship will experience verbal, emotional, physical, or sexual abuse from a partner. Right here in the US of A. So one particular issue, and obviously, guys, all of these issues are tremendously socially and economically costly. One issue that's gotten a lot of ink lately is campus sexual assault. A couple of things that don't always necessarily get portrayed about sexual assault is that it is an epidemic, right? We see all these headlines that campus sexual assault is an epidemic, and it absolutely is. But it's actually been an epidemic for a really long time. We just started paying attention to it, right? So I've been doing this work for like a decade. Campus sexual assault is nothing new. There's not this new rash of all of these sexual assaults that are happening. It's been this way forever, right? So it's great that people are finally paying attention to it. You may have heard the stat that between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 women will be sexually assaulted by the time they graduate college. The talking point that not too many people get is that you're actually more likely to be sexually assaulted if you don't find yourself on a college campus. So sexual violence is pervasive. The other thing that it would be very helpful to mention, especially as we start thinking about and talking about solutions to address campus sexual assault, is that 1 in 3 girls between the ages of 14 and their sophomore year in college will be sexually assaulted. This doesn't magically start happening when they get to college. Middle school students, high school students, it's not rare, right? So if we're gonna address it in a meaningful way, we really need to start a whole lot earlier. So the college conversation is always very interesting to me. I hear people talking and they're like, oh, how is this happening? All of this campus sexual assault, and it's so terrible. And essentially what we're doing is we're taking a bunch of teenagers, unarmed with no information, who have little to no relationship or sexual experience, with limited life experience, with teenage interpersonal and communication skills. They've been swimming in this sex-saturated culture for the past 18 years. What they know about sex and sexuality, they've gotten from television, movies, and unfortunately, in a lot of cases, pornography. The average age of first exposure to pornography in America is 11 years old. In the absence of a productive dialogue, the vacuum gets filled. If nobody is helping people look at and analyze these messages that we're constantly bombarded with, the cultural stereotypes are taken up, and that's reality, when it's really not reality, and it's not the reality that anybody wants. So then we take them away from their support networks, we give them unlimited freedom, right? And we pour a little booze on top. And we say, really, we act bumfuzzled, like, how could this have possibly have happened? And I look at it and I'm like, well, how could it possibly not have happened? You've given them nothing. And it sucks for victims, and it sucks for perpetrators too. Some perpetrators don't even know that they're perpetrators, right? I had a conversation not too long ago about consent with some middle schoolers in 8th grade, and somebody said something to the effect of, well, if they let me do it to them, how is that not consent? What a fabulous conversation to pick that apart with a 13-year-old, right? So we had a conversation about coercive sex. If you're constantly poking at someone, right, and how fabulous that he actually said that out loud, right? So we could actually talk about it. But I digress. So it's really easy for us to point the finger at colleges and universities and say, you guys need to do better. What really needs to happen is that we all need to do better. Kids deserve so much more than they're currently getting. In many cases, when I talk to them before I walk in, they tell me they feel like they're working without a net. And parents say the exact same thing. I feel like I'm working without a net. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. What am I supposed to do? Just showing up is something. So we already established sex ed is broken. What do we do? Well, the good news is we couldn't be doing much worse than we're already doing, right? So there's not too much room to go down. So there's lots of things that we can do. One thing that we can do is talk. We all have teenagers in our lives. A lot of you are parents. Your kids are dying to talk to you. Let me tell you one other thing. Kids look to people like me for information, for technical information. A lot of parents don't talk because they don't want to explain intercourse. That gives them a tremendous amount of anxiety. Don't worry, they don't need you to explain intercourse. Hopefully, eventually, they'll have somebody like me, right? So kids look to educators for technical information. Kids look to parents for, what do you want my relationships to be like? When do you think it's appropriate to date? What kinds of people should I be seeking out, right? When is it appropriate for me to become sexually active? Those are the kinds of things and the kinds of questions, how are women supposed to behave? How are men supposed to behave? These are considerably easier, right? 2 other things about parents. Parents worry that they're gonna mess up their kids. I would encourage you to think, how many times do you have to tell them to do something a certain way before they do it right? Right? You're not gonna break them. And again, if you stop thinking of it as an event and you think about it more as a process, it takes a tremendous amount of pressure off. So reconnecting parents and their kids. Other things that we can do, instead of focusing on information, thinking about how we can help kids develop thinking skills, critical thinking skills, how we can help them apply the information and give them content that actually parallels their real life experiences. How can we help them anticipate the situations that they might find themselves in and how they want to act and behave, right, in advance of them actually being in those positions? So kids need a wide-angle lens, and I really feel like that's a big part of what's missing. Their awesome adolescent brains aren't done developing until they're about 25, so as much as we can help them strategize and think through and, logically consider the information, the better off they're all going to be. If not us, then who? If not now, then when? In the amount of time I was just speaking with you, thank you for turning that off. In the amount of time that I was just speaking with you, 10 sexual assaults occurred in the United States, 116 women became unintentionally pregnant, and 651 people contracted a sexually transmitted infection. Half of those, 651, were between the ages of 15 and 24. So folks, the clock is ticking. My name's Sam Bushman, and I'm the founder and CEO of Talk the New Sex Ed. Thank you so much.